Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot and a PMDG 777 beta tester. Welcome to this tutorial on the before start procedure, engine start and after start procedure in the PMDG Boeing 777. If you're interested in a written version or a more extensive version, I can very much recommend my Ultimate 777 Guide ebook. More on that in the video description below. And now let's get right into it. So we are leaving this off where we have stopped. Basically we completed the pre-flight checklist and we now have to prepare the airplane for pushback. Our takeoff performance calculation is done. All we gotta do now is to remove all the ground equipment and then run the procedures. So the first thing we always gotta do is verify that the APU is running. Now you can verify that by looking at the ICAS and you've got the APU running message over there. That is your indication that you are good to go to disconnect the external power units and remove them through the Universal Flight Tablet. If you go down here into the ground operations and ground connections, then we can release any ground connection we might have had in here. And we can also remove the chocks as soon as we verified that our parking brake is indeed set. So parking brake is gone and the ground connections are gone. Also in here we can release any ground service vehicle that might have been connected, and we can close all doors, and once they are closed also arm all doors in here. To give you a quick example, we are just going to disarm entry 2 left and disarm all the slides. And we can cross-check this on the doors synoptic page on the ICAS. So basically when you select the door page, for example, I've selected it just over here, then you will see the status indicator of the doors, which is the amber one you see over there. You see if the slide is armed or disarmed. So M is a disarmed slide, A is an armed slide. Note that the slide arming indicator is optional equipment in the 777 and not every aircraft has them fitted. So to close all the doors we are going to hit the close all button over here. And as soon as the doors are all closed, we can go ahead and arm them all so that the slides will deploy if necessary. If you want a quick way to get rid of any synoptic displays, just take the inboard display selector, switch it from norm to nav and back to MFD, and then the standard navigation display is going to show and the display selector is returned back to the lower center position. We have also already ordered our GSX pushback, so we are good to go on GSX as well, and we can basically prepare our aircraft now for the push. The before start procedure starts with setting up the MCP. So on here we are going to insert the V2 speed, which today is 172 knots. Then we're going to insert the runway heading, which as we can see is 314 degrees. You typically see that on the first track on the legs page, otherwise you can also have a look at the ground chart. So 314, and our first cleared altitude is going to be 5,000 feet, which we can set in here. Note that whenever I'm changing the altitude, I will select 1,000 on here, so that it's easier to change it, and then go back to auto. Now the reasons for that will be explained in the climb tutorial when it gets even more important. Since we have prepared our FMC to fly the routing completely on FMC, we can enter LNAV and VNAV, and that concludes the MCP setup. To verify that everything has indeed been correctly transferred to the automatics of the airplane, we now read out the FMS, and that is, or the FMA, and that is blank, toga, toga, flight director, LNAV, VNAV armed. So now we can continue our setup, and as soon as clearance from the ground crew is received, we can pressurize the hydraulics. It's important that we start with the right-hand system so that fluid transfer does not occur between the systems. So we put the right ELEC demand pump on auto, wait until the fault light extinguishes, and now we can put the rest of the system on, like this. When the hydraulic system is on, we turn on our fuel pumps, and we start with our main tank pumps, and only if the fuel in center ICAS message illuminates, only then we turn on the center pumps. Don't just turn them on, but make it dependent on the ICAS message. From there, do not touch the beacon yet, but rather we are moving down to our trim. And we can see we've got a trim of 4.5 units. So we're going to set this down here. 4.5 units set. The transponder goes onto XPNDR, and that is our switching completed. Now we can open the electronic checklist, and we can do the before start checklist down to beacon. So that's going to be flight deck door. And here's already the first reason we do this checklist. Closed and locked. MCP, V2172, heading 314, altitude 5000. Takeoff speeds, V1163, VR169, V2172, CDU preflight, completed, trims, 4.5 units, 0 and 0. Taxi and takeoff briefing, completed, holding at beacon. The reason we do this is because turning the beacon light on means that no ground vehicles are allowed to pass behind the aircraft any longer. And since we don't want drivers on the ground to get too accustomed to driving behind an aircraft that stands with the beacon on for a long time, we'll leave the beacon off until we are actually ready to push. So we are ready to push now, so let's go ahead and inform GSX that we want to continue the pushback and face the nose to the right. And as soon as pushback clearance is received, we are going to turn on the beacon light, and you can see that this has automatically completed the before start checklist. When the checklist complete shows, that is our sign that we can remove the checklist, and we're going to replace it with the engine synoptic display for our pushback. So, now that we are ready to go, pushback clearance is received, we are going to release our park and brake, and we can start our pushback procedure. Reselecting cabin interphone over here, as I mentioned earlier, you should leave it on cabin interphone as default page. Alright, and with that, we have made it out of New York. Rather tight over here with a wing, isn't it? So, engine start in the 777 is fairly easy as it is fully automated. However, we need to be aware of one difference between the types. If your 777 is fitted with GE90 engines like this one, then you need to start one engine at a time. In some companies, the engine that's on the inner side of the turn is going to be started first, so that the pushback tuck is assisted by the high idle thrust of the 777's engine. In other companies, the start sequence is fixed, and in again other companies, the pilot can just decide on their own. In any case, if you have a 777 that is fitted with the Rolls-Royce or Pratt & Whitney engines, then you can start both engines at the same time. Be aware that only the 777-200ER has different engine options. On the others, it's basically always the GE90. Alright, so we've completed our pushback to a point where we no longer face any gate and any parked aircraft, so let's go ahead and start the right engine first. Starting the engine is fairly easy. You're going to select the start selector as start and immediately turn on the fuel control switch. The electronic engine control takes care of the entire rest of the startup process, so you don't need to deal with anything else of the engine start. It's all done automatically. And just to add to the information, just because it says fuel control switch down here, that does not mean that you directly control the fuel valves. Much rather, this only tells the electronic engine control that fuel may be added if the EEC feels that it's right. And you can see that it's just about started adding fuel as our N1 is increasing through 30 and a bit %. The exact value is going to vary a bit. You can tell that the engine start is finished by looking at the red EGT line down here. When that disappears, that indicates that your engine start is basically complete and the engine has reached its self-sustaining RPMs. Okay, now that engine 2 is started, we're going to proceed starting the left engine. So start selector is start, fuel cutoff switch to run, and now the engine start process is automatically initiated. Our pushback is also complete, so I am going to set the park and brake over here so that the ground crew can start preparing the airplane for taxi. Engine start process, once again, is fully automated over here, so we don't need to do anything about this. There is only a single situation in which a manual interruption of the start procedure may be required, and that is if there is no oil pressure indication after the EGT starts to increase. So oil pressure is down here and the EGT is up here. If there is no oil pressure in here by the time EGT is increasing, we need to do the aborted engine start checklist, which you can find under the non-normal checklists in the electronic checklists. So the starter is disconnected, the engine start is complete, so we can go ahead and run the procedure. APU off, engine anti-ice as needed. So normally we leave it on auto, but if there is known icing conditions, so if there is visible moisture, that can be rain, fog, or low-lying clouds below the thrust reduction altitude, then we would turn the engine anti-ice to on. On the ground, the auto mode has no way of sensing reliably if icing exists. So on the ground, you gotta put them to on if icing conditions exist. Next, we verify that the ground equipment is clear, and we can see the ramp agent down here holding the pin, and giving us the clear signal. And when that is received, we're going to set the flaps to the takeoff position. Next, we do the flight control check, and there is a little bit of a disagreement between the different 777 operators whether the flight control page should be shown or not. We'll just disregard that ICAS message over here for now. We'll solve that later. And you can see it now tells us checklist non-normal because there is an unworked on non-normal checklist. So there is a little bit of a disagreement between operators if the flight control synoptic page should be used on the flight control check. Basically, what we do in the flight control check is we verify the freedom of movement of the controls and that the controls return to center. We don't need to check if they're actually traveling, because if they were not, we would receive cautions about it. For that reason, I recommend not to use the flight control synoptic page unless it's really needed. So let's now go ahead and run the flight control check. We need to make slow and deliberate inputs one at a time, and the entire check should take more than approximately 6 seconds unless you can get Marston's flight control fault on the ICAS. So let's go ahead and run the check. So we go full up, then we go full down, and back to neutral. Full left, full right, neutral. And the rudder, full left, full right, neutral. Once that is done, we press recall to recall any fault messages we may have had. And you can see that indeed there is one fault message that we need to deal with. And when the recall is checked, we are going to do the checklist. Now, I'm just going to skip over this because this is not part of normal procedures over here. So if there was no fault, the before taxi checklist would open automatically. So let's go ahead and do that. Anti-ice, auto, recall, checked, flight controls, checked, ground equipment, clear. Before taxi checklist complete. Now, I will carry out that non-normal checklist here off screen because this tutorial aims to show the normal procedures of the aircraft. So for that reason, we consider that we can ignore the pack faults over there, and we are just going to cancel that away. Of course, if this happens to you on the line, you would absolutely run the checklists. Well, and this already concludes the procedure. I do hope that you liked this tutorial. As always, if you're interested in more backgrounds and into even greater detail, check out my Ultimate 777 Guide ebook. More on that in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and then I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one. In the meantime, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and if you really like what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.